And so it's fitting that David's here today to share this extraordinary story. He is definitely someone who has not waited a single moment before starting to improve the world. I am so delighted to welcome back our friend, David Campbell.
Thanks, Arlene. It's really a great pleasure to be back in Buffalo with all friends and people I've known. I think the last time I was up at this podium was in the 1990s. We were celebrating a very, very successful campaign. I talked to some of the people out in the foyer who were part of that campaign. And actually, it was just really a lot of fun. For those of you who may or may not decide whether you're going to participate in actually working on the campaign, well organized, well executed. We had a lot of fun. I think we did a lot of good. And congratulations to the United Way for the work that you continue to do. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a rather strange ride around the world. I'm going to take you into 4 disasters, although I didn't choose them to be a full eclectic assortment. It will be a tsunami, a hurricane, an earthquake, and a typhoon. And I'll also take you on the journey I've been on for the past 30 months with zero anticipation or planning that I would do anything like this 30 months ago. Part of the reason I think it happened is because of the extensive involvement I had with the community when I was in Buffalo, and I moved to Boston about a dozen years ago and didn't have that same involvement there. And frankly, I think to some extent, I built up a need to find that additional purpose that I think all of us want to have in our lives. And my sense of that purpose was met by a series of activities that were really initiated by the tsunami that happened on December 26, 2004. The tsunami was triggered by the largest earthquake that's hit the world in the last 40 years. And it created tremendous chaos. 225,000 people were killed in a 2-minute period of time in countries around the world. It triggered in many people around the world a desire to do something. And the phrase that's now I'm familiar with the disaster business, if you will, is spontaneous volunteers. That is people who have a feeling that I want to do something more, frankly, than simply write a check. I had that same feeling when the tsunami hit, and there was an intersection of multiple events. As Arlene mentioned, I'd spent 40 years in a technology career, my last period of time in Boston, running a company that had extensive capability in the internet. And when the tsunami happened, I combined a set of events. I felt if I could put myself in the middle of a disaster area, but have access to the internet, I could do many things. Number one, I could be certain that the communication about the event would be accurate, so I could use the internet as a vehicle to send information out. I believe that if I identified needs, I could communicate to my circle of friends and that they would do something to help benefit those communities. I had no idea what to do. In the 10 days before I left for Thailand, I spent my time trying to determine basically, what do you take to a disaster? I mean, literally, I packed a suitcase with rubber gloves and face masks and GPS devices and walkie-talkies and laptop computers, and who knows what you take to a disaster. But I'll tell you a little bit the story of what happened. Again, the disaster, the tsunami was triggered by this massive earthquake off the island of Indonesia. It was so powerful that it sent waves that as they hit the shore in Thailand, a 60-foot wall of water stormed in, totally unexpected, again, killing several 100,000 people and doing tremendous physical damage. This is the village of Bang Tao on the island of Phuket off Thailand. And when I made the decision I wanted to respond to the tsunami, I spent my time on the internet looking for people who were doing something and found an article, interestingly, by a gentleman by the name of Mike Sajelski, who at one time lived in Springville, New York, and was at this time on the island of Phuket, and after the tsunami happened, started an organizing effort to get the local people to do something. The story is, as I've heard with Mike, that when everyone was sitting around traumatized, he picked up a shovel, cleared 2 square feet of land and said, that's the beginning, let's work our way out. And people started cleaning up the debris in the aftermath so they could do something. Mike was picked up in an article on CNN. I found a snippet on him, including the link to Springville. Because he had a somewhat unusual name, I was able to search him out using the internet and send him an email basically saying, how would you like another Buffalo Bills fan to show up in Phuket and help you? He sent back saying, I don't know who you are or where you're coming from, but if you want to come, we're well happy to have you. And so 2 weeks later, I ended up showing up in Bangkok, Thailand with my suitcase and started working with Mike. After a disaster, there's chaos, and what's useful is to have a flexible resource that has some money to spend in an open mind toward what we're going to do. Some of these pictures will just show you the impact of what the tsunami did in Thailand, and even in the bad times, there's people there and you're working. The key thing of this kind of volunteering is the beauty of working very directly and tangibly with individuals and with people. An example of the kind of project that we did there, this area of Bangkok is a fishing village. It's Muslim. This area of Thailand is Muslim. And I was particularly happy to be able to represent our country, frankly, in a place that showed a different face of America. And it seemed to me a very important and positive thing. This was a fishing village. These are the kind of fishing boats they use. They're called longtail boats because the fishermen go far out, and they have these large, heavy boats that require a long propeller shaft-driven motor, have long, deep nets, and a heavy equipment to bring the nets up. So it costs about $5,000 to build and replace one of these boats. One of the projects we took on as an example of using the flexible response that was required and the internet was to identify a fishing family, make sure they were properly qualified. We used money to jumpstart the building of multiple boats, and then we would take the fisherman's story using expats, British, Welsh, American, that lived in that area of Phuket, and send the story back to a yacht club and ask that yacht club to raise the $5,000 to pay for that boat. Once we identified a specific individual and a specific need, it was very easy to get people to step up to that kind of fundraising. And so we replaced dozens and dozens of fishing boats and allowed these people to get back to earning a livelihood and get back to having their pride. One of the interesting, just true stories that happened is that sometimes people would donate the money, but they wanted to name the boat. So they'd say, I'll give the money for the boat, but I want to name it after my grandchild or name it after my yacht club. This is a true story of an individual that I was speaking with. And I said, we've got money for your boat. Do you mind if we name it? And, sort of put their name on it. And he had this one child who was still sort of traumatized from the tsunami. He said, well, I lost my daughter, Rosanna, in the tsunami, and I hoped to name the boat Rosanna so that she would always be with me. I said, well, your boat's going to be named Rosanna. That was done. So this is the man with his boat, Rosanna, and it was back in it. Part of the message of this kind of activity is, although you're in the middle of chaos and people are sleeping in air mattresses without power and water and other things, you have these interactions that are so real and sweet and personal that they accomplish things that I think can't be accomplished in any other way. One of the phrases that came to me when I was there was that we were establishing, as I use the phrase, bridges of trust. That if individuals are in the middle of a disaster scene and they write back to their family and their friends and say, this is what it is like, this is what we need, then people will respond in a very effective way. And again, with the internet as it exists today, it's possible to drop individuals into anywhere in the world and carry that message out more clearly. And as we started to work, we started to realize we can use those kind of benefits. The other experience that was relevant, this is the picture of our group in Phuket at about week 4. These are a group of about 85 people, none of whom knew each other 4 weeks earlier, that showed up in this remote place and tried to determine how to work together. This was one of the places where I had an interesting definition of a new phrase, a new definition of the phrase, quote, a senior moment. I think it should be defined. That is, when you see a pattern emerging, then your experience says, I've seen this pattern before, I know how to solve this problem. And what happened when I was in Phuket was, as our group went from 10 to 30 to 50 to 80, candidly it reminded me of the early days of CTG when we grew from 10 to 30 to 50 to 80. There it was year 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Here it was week 1 to week 2 to week 3 to week 4. But as soon as we got to 30 and we'd gone to 50, I started seeing we need different management models at these different levels. At this size, we need someone responsible for supplies, someone responsible for transportation, someone responsible for feeding, someone responsible for organizing and producing the queue of work we'll have so that we can properly match volunteers against an array of work to be done. And it was actually that management experience of understanding different approaches to organize different scale of operations that I think allowed us to get ahead of the game. We also took the business experience of learning from what other people are doing by traveling to other villages in Thailand to see what other relief efforts were going on, and ended up joining with a group in a village nearby called Campbell. And once we were working in 2 villages, this project was what we called the Bang Tao Recovery Project. We obviously didn't spend a lot of money on branding. But when we picked up a second village, we said, what are we going to call it? And they said, well, you're doing hands-on work. We went to see if the website was available. Hands-on Thailand was available. That's how we took that name. When we came back after finishing the project in Phuket, it had been one of the most satisfying experiences of my life and of other people. Several of us stayed together, and we're talking about doing an additional project when Katrina hit. Katrina hit on August 29th, 2005. And over the next day or two, we decided we were going to go officially, if you will, into business. And so we filed at that time, that weekend, for our 501c3 status. And at this time took the name Hands-On Worldwide, on the basis that Hands-On Thailand was our first project, Hands-On USA would become our second. And we went in 3 different directions. The 3 of us were working together. I went and got the 501c3 done, and got the bank account set up so we could take online donations. The second volunteer named Darius, who was with me in Thailand, got our website set up so we would have information for volunteers and information for donors. The third guy was a policeman from Tennessee. He started talking to the police organizations down on the Gulf Coast to determine where we should go and retrospectively identify what I call my Goldilocks test. New Orleans was too big. Other places were too small. Gulfport and Biloxi we thought were just right. We were invited down and stayed in the homes of the Gulfport police because the police were on 24-hour duty. They couldn't get home to take care of their own families or their neighbors. That was putting pressure on them. So we went so that we could help deal with their personal issues and allow them to focus on being the first responders that they were. And so when we first went down, we lived in the homes of Gulfport police. Eventually the Gulfport police introduced us to Biloxi police, and through them we got a church building that was donated for our use. And over the next several months we brought 1,500 volunteers down to Biloxi, Mississippi to help. This is what the scenes were like in Biloxi at that time, where if you've been if you go down there now, you'll see, frankly, it's still pretty much similar in terms of the devastation. Beautiful homes completely destroyed. 70 miles. You could drive from here to Rochester, driving by nothing but devastation. And it's a staggering impact still there to this day. We took models from our experiences in Phuket, and one of the things we learned is that if volunteers are going to be spontaneous, they don't come for defined periods of time. Therefore, you have to organize and manage your efforts in a way that will allow you to deal with this flow of people. Think about running on average about a 150-person organization where you have 100% turnover every 3 to 4 weeks. So you have to find a management system that will work. The way we evolved it in Phuket and perfected it, I think honestly, in Biloxi, was to every day have an all-hands meeting. So this is the building we're in. The upstairs above there is a walking track, which is where we have 100 people sleeping on air mattresses or pods. Down below is where we would serve meals, and at the end of every day have an all-hands meeting. The all-hands meeting starts with new people are introduced, but then we go around the room and have the various work crews simply tell the story of what they did that day. If they were using chainsaws to cut trees off buildings, putting tarps on new houses, gutting out a house, doing mold removal, working with the Salvation Army, working with FEMA. And when they're telling stories, it's pretty fascinating. People don't realize what we're doing now is orientation. Because what we're really doing is telling new people, this is what we do. Then at the end of the meeting, team leaders will say, this is what we need to do tomorrow, and individuals choose what they want to do. If they've had 3 days of being out in the sun on a roof doing tarping, they might want to spend the day working in the Salvation Army warehouse. If they've been in the warehouse for 2 days and haven't seen people, they might want to go out with the street crew and give out tents or blankets or just interact with people directly. And our message to our volunteers always was, if one of the residents wants to talk to you, that's the most important thing you can do. If we're in a crew of 6 and you see someone sitting on a stoop talking with someone, that's the most valuable thing we do. Let them tell their story, again, talk to them. Because the immediacy of a real person giving up their life to come and help someone is the strongest message we can send to those people, that there are people who care, that the country cares, and we wanted to do something to help. In this message, it's hard to pick them out. On the left, this front table is Mike Mead, who some of you might know from Springville. Standing up in the back, and somewhere in the room also is a wonderful guy by the name of Jim Mahar. Jim, where are you? Can you stand up for a second? Jim Mahar is a professor at St. Bonaventure who's brought several hundred students from Bonaventure down to Biloxi. He set up a group called Bona Response, and using the same model we have, came here to Buffalo after the storm last October, and for 7 weekends came up with chainsaws from Biloxi and from Hands-On, and worked to help the people here deal with their problems. So that concept of the all-hands meeting basically is you're really running the organization one day at a time. So if someone stays for a month or a week, it really doesn't matter. You can use them effectively. The other thing we found is if you get a large enough group, 50 or more spontaneous volunteers, among the group you will have the ability to do anything you need to get done. And so our time in Biloxi, this is a group actually from Alfred State. The president of Alfred State at the time, Dr. Gupta, came down and led a group of faculty and students. This tractor was actually donated to us by Mark IV. If there's any folks from Mark IV in the audience, thank you. And their thrill, I talked to Bill Montagos, they sent us a check for $25,000. And the next week we sent back pictures of, here's your money and the tractor it bought and the productivity that's been enhanced by what you did for us. And they were more impressed by the immediacy of what could be done, but you can do that if you're there and you're quick and you're flexible. One of the things that came up in one of our all-hands meetings, when we would always take Q&A, and people said, why aren't other people doing it? Why isn't Red Cross doing this? Why isn't the Salvation Army doing that? And the thought that came to me at the time was, I don't want to spend any time on why other people aren't what they're doing. Let's us do what we want to be. Let's be the way we think the world should be, which evolved with the statement that came from Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And I think it was very real for the volunteers at Hands On. I think it would be very real for you. If you want the world to be different, make it different by what you do. Each of us have the ability to reach out and touch. And my view is that as a volunteer, you really win 3 times. The recipient of the service you provide, you will learn more about a different part of life than you would in any other way. And actually the feeling of being useful and purposeful is, I think, the most important gift you would get out of that kind of volunteering. So just a couple more pictures. Darius was my main guy from Thailand. And one of the things we did as a project, for example, is put up a street sign system. Sort of obviously after a hurricane, all this traffic control and street signs are gone. We had people sit down, make up street signs, put up street signs. People couldn't get around because their cars were lost. We bought 150 bicycles, put them together and handed them out to families. My point of it being, it's useful to be flexible and creative in the middle of chaos because you can then solve what is the real problem that's there. And you can't know what the real problem is if you're not in the middle of it. People would call from a distance and say, we have an idea of what you could do or should do. My comment would always be, give me butts and seats. If you get someone down here, living here, then I'll take their advice. I don't need advice from anyone anywhere else. Give me butts and seats. I got all the time in the world for you. Call me from Seattle or New York, I have no time for you. And anybody who has to react with, interact with, or deal with people who've had a major disaster, recognize that they've gone through trauma, they're in an extraordinary circumstance. If you really want to help, you got to be there on the scene and understand what's going on to really be effective and helpful. This is my 2 guys. We now have leveraged 2,000 volunteers over the various engagements with 2 paid operations directors. These are my 2 guys who showed up first as volunteers. The thing they're holding is a symbol of a lighthouse. Biloxi is on the Gulf Coast. It has a beautiful lighthouse on the coast, which is the symbol of the city. The city uses that symbol as the key to the city. Only one survived Katrina, and the city presented it to us at a ceremony for Hands On, which was, imagine, was a pretty emotional event. That was a fun time. This was the local newspaper that won the Pulitzer Prize last year for their news coverage of Katrina, the January 1st edition with the story of the year and one of our volunteers on the cover. We took the approach that we're most effective in the first 4 months after a disaster, and so we turned our center in Biloxi over to another group which now operates under